call this work session to order. Do we have a agenda or just a handout?
We don't do agendas for work.
Right, okay. Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, we'll start with introductions. You, Mr. Weddleton.
Roll call or something?
I just say here.
No, it's introductions, not roll call, because we're in a work session now.
Yeah.
This is a work session for the.
Just tell us your name, John.
Say your name.
John,
It's not a trick question.
Favorite color?
He's here, and I go Weddleton. Okay, sorry.
Say your name, John.
Weddleton.
Suzanne McMahon.
Thank you.
Felix Rivera.
Pete Peterson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Duke Trainee.
Eric Crook.
Austin Davidson.
Brad Dyson.
Management budget.
Okay, great. So, thank you, Amy. And also we have Mayor Berkowitz with us as well. So we're starting with our first work session on the 2019 budget. Take it away, Mr. Wilbur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Today, the purpose of our work session is to give the Assembly a high-level overview of the 2008 or 2019 operating capital and utility budget. The format that we have for you today is very similar to the one that we had last year. I'm going to provide a little bit more basics, I think, initially for these, just as a reminder. We're going to talk about those three. What we do when we build a budget is we basically take the 2018 budget that was approved and modified in April of 2018. That is basically the base that we use to build 2019. Then what we do is we take the cost adjustments that are related to labor, medical, or any other committed contributions that we have to have. We add those things into a continuation budget. We take the time to review our revenue sources, whether they're primarily with non-property taxes. So we work with Treasury, work with Public Finance, we work with the departments to find out if there's any adjustments in their revenues, any adjustments in the non-property tax revenues, and we take those things into account. Then our process is we've asked departments to give us submissions for additions and reductions, depending on how we give them instructions in July. And as part of that process, we work with the administration to include some of those additions and those, and if there's any considerations of changes in budget. But the thing that we do for the Assembly members is that every year we typically have one-time items. For example, we might have a one-time item that we add to the budget. When we roll into 19, we take those one-time items off. And if the administration wants to, let's say, for example, as you'll see in this one, homeless and housing and homelessness was one-time money last year. We've then added it again this year. So, and so we do make those changes as we go forward. And I think those are the highlights I want to share with you. So the administration's 2000 proposed budget priorities are very similar to last year. In the arena of public safety, the mayor and his team will continue to focus on building and supporting public safety. As you will eventually see when we give you the budget, similar to last year, about 40%, a little more than about 40% of our entire general government budget is spent on public safety, and over 40% of our staffing is targeted towards public safety. And we're going to continue that in this budget cycle as well. Under economic development, we've been doing things mostly out of Chris Schuete's shop, but also in our capital improvement program where we can target redevelopment or promote development in the downtown area and make investments in our infrastructure, not only in general government and with utilities. Continuing to focus on the importance of housing and homelessness, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. And while fund balance is an important priority, and I know it's been on the Assembly's mind, and I wanted to bring it to the attention right here. And you will see in your documents next week that the fund balance number of a -6 was identified. But one of the things I want to bring to the Assembly's attention is in that analysis, what we've discovered is in 2017, we had settlements. We paid settlements and judgments in 2017. we recoup those settlements. So we dip into our cash pool to make those payments. But the way the tax cap works is then we assess for that recovery. It's a one-time recovery. In that $6 million, that recouping of the settlements was not included. So right now, we're at about $3 million. So we're working to get that number refined, and I'm talking with the CFO to make sure that of the balance of those, we're working the calculations to make sure that we get an accurate fund balance number. So the good news is we're moving in the right direction.
Lance, we have a question here.
One quick
from Mr.
question,
Trainer.
Lance. So you said 3 million. Is that a negative 3 million or a plus 3 million?
It's a negative.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah. So we're working diligently to make sure that we get that number accurate, because if we are in a negative situation, we need to make sure that as we prepare and adopt and approve a balanced budget, that we take into account if we are in a negative fund balance situation. I will add this, though, and I want to make sure that this is clear, particularly to members of the audience who might not be. We have almost $50 million in savings. Okay. Fund balance is a combination of basically two big things. It's a 10% reserve that maintains our bond rating. That's nowhere near in jeopardy in this situation. We also have an emergency reserve. When we have settlements or judgments, or if we have a special election, we dip into that 2%. At the end of the year, we want to make sure that we keep that 2%. And so for some reason in our revenues or expenses, so shoring up that fund balance is where we're at. There have been times where we've met our 10 and our 2 and had extra. It's called unrestricted fund balance. And then we've added those in. So it's that unrestricted that's not available to us right now, but we are working to finalize and refine that fund balance. So I put it on the slide here because I know it's of importance not only to the Assembly but to the administration. I know that the CFO is working with his team to get a final number for all of us.
Mr. Dunbar?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Mr.
Thank
Constant.
you. Just quickly on that. So at the last budget and finance meeting, it was 6 million. I heard another number that I didn't want to say, and now 3 million. And so then you said there were legal settlements and other items. So you're saying that those items made up the difference between the 6 and the 3?
Right, because what had happened in the number, we actually spent in 17 $6 million. But when we spend those things, those settlements, the way the tax cap works, when we set the tax cap in 18 to recover for settlements in 17, that number, those monies go back into the coffers to shore that up, and that was not calculated initially. Okay. So under some of the challenges, I mean, what you'll see in our particular, when we do a carry forward budget, there's two primary things that we look at as we move forward. One of those is our contributions and costs to healthcare and the benefits, PERS, Social Security, things like that. That from 2018 to 19, you see about $2.75 million increase that we need to make sure that we account for. Our total labor, it's about 3.6 increase. And looking back in the last 3 years of budgeting, that labor number is pretty much the lowest it's ever been. It's been gradually declining over years. So, however, one of the things that the Assembly may recall, in 2018, we did something called a certificate of participation. We looked at how we were going to contribute to the police and fire retirement system. And originally we had $10 million that we were contributing annually. We took a look at that, basically refinanced how we would and figure out how we would contribute to that. We are back in 19, we have to do that. That number is $5.4 million, so that's numbers that we have to contribute in to the police and fire retirement system.
Mr. Chair.
Yep, Mr. Dyson.
So, with this COP, what we've done is reduced what we have to pay annually, but I assume stretched it over a longer period of time.
I think the terms of how we are paying it are actually making the total payments less to meet our commitments, but I'll confirm that. I don't think that if it had been lengthened in time, I'll confirm that.
I think it was.
respectfully, that sounds like Nixon saying you cut off the end of the rope and put it in the other. There's gotta be.
You compared me to Nixon? I'm gonna try that again.
If a helicopter come to get you, don't worry about it.
Oh, Mr. Falls, you reminded me, we are paying over a long time. We are paying over a long time.
And the lower rate, lower fixed rate.
And,
We have a low fixed rate on the certificates of participation. Previously, the rate was not a rate that we were locked into paying. It was a result of market performance. So every year, the fund would tell us what do you owe us.
And now?
And now we have forward funded our future contributions by borrowing that money, and now we know what the fixed rate is. And Ross Griswold will have to tell us what the numbers, but it is a relatively low rate.
And let the record reflect, Bill said yes.
Wonderful. Mr. Rivera and then Mr. Croft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question and clarity for me. So on the healthcare and benefits, the increase 2.75 million. Should we, because of our investment in Vera Whole Health, should we be seeing that decrease in future years, or is it going to come from some savings going to come in a different manner?
through the chair, Mr. Rivera, excellent question. So right now we are looking at the savings, that potential savings that we would have from Vera Clinic. It's basically brand new in operation. I think in 1Q would be the time that we have an accurate reflection of what that would be. We'd have almost a year in service.
Got it. Thank you.
Well, as a follow-up to that, is it possible that we could still see health and care benefits, the costs go up, but go up at a much slower rate than it otherwise would be absent Vera Whole Health?
That is possible. I mean, currently our performance in 2018 is very good, and so just based on that performance on claims and costs, and that in and of itself could reduce our total
Great.
costs.
Everybody stay healthy. Mr. Croft.
I'm still stuck on the COP, and maybe in the same way Mr. Dyson was. But we saved 10 million, and now we're paying 5.4. Why isn't this a net positive instead of a negative? I mean, we took off the books the random big.
Exactly right. The way the certificates of participation were structured, we brought a whole bunch of money, exchanged our $10 million a year obligation, and we re-advertised the $10 million obligation. But one extra design choice. We paid nothing in the first year. Okay. So we went from 10 to 0, now to 5.4.
In effect, we're paying this 1 year 15, and out rounding down whatever, 15, and later we'll have a $5 million savings.
No.
That is our contribution in 19.
Our contribution was 10 million. Then next year was 0. Next year will be 5.4. The year after that will be 5.4. The year after that will be 5.4.
Well then, yeah, okay, so we saved the 10.
2 years ago it was 10. Last year it was 0. This year it's 5.4.
We're still a net almost 5 of savings. We just, it's compared to last
But it's
year.
up 5 from last year.
From our 0
Right.
last year.
In 19, we didn't have it.
Remember we did the 0 last year.
Remember it. Great. Okay.
So the other thing I want to bring to the Assembly's attention, we have multiple sources of revenues that support the budget. Some of them non-property taxes, some of them property taxes. These are some of the revenue sources and some of the changes that I want to make the Assembly aware of. And if there are other revenues that you have interest on, I can share those with you as well. But to remind the Assembly, marijuana in 2019 is inside the cap. And
So did we raise the cap to account for that, or is that replacing property tax?
replacing property taxes.
So it's kind of a drop for us, then, because it was on top when we had it to spend, now it replaces property tax.
Right.
To say that louder, the marijuana revenue was floating on top of the cap. And this year, the cap adjusts to where the marijuana tax was, and now compresses marijuana and property tax.
So we bumped the tax cap up to account for that, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Weldon.
So the $4 million number, that is the total amount of revenue we project in 2019. That's not a jump in $4 million. Right now, the 19 budget, the 18 budget has 3.5. We expect another $500,000 for a total of $4 million. Medicaid transports, this is something new. The legislature has passed some legislation that allows local governments to recover from Medicaid the cost of transport of patients that are paid for out of Medicaid. It is not something we've been able to do in the past. It's required a change in state legislation. So thanks to Chief Hetrick, the chief in Fairbanks and Juneau, they've been working with the Fire Chiefs Association to put that in play with the state. We are now working with the state, now that the law has been passed, to do the necessary steps to provide the public notice and put the rules together and provide them to the feds, which allows us to recover those. So we will incur at least $3.5 million of Medicaid transport expenses. We expect to recoup those through new federal money as part of our 19. So it's a brand new revenue source. This is not new to the states. Frankly, Oregon, Washington, other states have done this, and so we are piggybacking on that process. So that is, as a matter of fact, we may be able to recoup some costs in 2018, depending on when the notice goes out. So that's something we've incorporated into our 19 budget. Revenue sharing, we built 18.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, Lance, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. We got Mr. Constant and Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Lance. So Medicaid transports, what does that include?
So basically, if the fire department picks up a patient and they ground transportation, and they are a patient that is paid for out of Medicaid, the transportation costs and the service in the transportation, we're allowed to recoup more of that cost.
So does that then include the Anchorage Safety Patrol transports? And if not, can we work to include them so that service that we pay for out of our ears can start paying for itself?
I will talk to the chief and find out. I do not know.
Mr. Falsey, do you have a follow-up to that?
I think the answer to that is no, because this is medical reimbursement. The same way that you call an ambulance to take you to the hospital, you get billed in your insurance. And the difference. Since the safety patrol is taking you to the sleep off syndrome, I'm not sure that's
After they're medically cleared. So this is certainly, there's a medical link in there. I just don't know where it attaches. And so it's certainly worth investigating. If it's a simple policy change, then we should try.
I will check with the chief. I know to follow up with Mr. Falsey, most of the way that other states have applied and the feds have allowed is it's an EMS medical transport. But I'll find out.
Mr. Trainee and then Mr.
Now,
Dyson.
do we charge different rates for different parts of town? Or do we have one standard rate?
I don't believe we charge different rates for different parts of town.
Ona, do you have
Ona's
a
got
follow-up?
her hand up.
Through the chair, I believe it's not for different parts of town, but for different services rendered. So there are different kinds of transports, and they are reimbursed at different rates.
Okay, but our taxpayers, the average person won't see it, well, because the feds will pick it up? Okay.
Well, this is coming out of Medicaid funds. Yeah. Mr. Dyson, do you have a follow-up?
Just always get these calls from people forced.
I was under the impression that medical transports from Eagle River are more expensive, arguably. So if I heard you right, ambulance, EMS picks somebody up and takes them to the hospital, and they get admitted, and then ultimately there's a Medicaid reimbursement, and then they have some record that an ambulance picked them up, and then the ambulance service gets reimbursed.
That's my understanding as well. They keep a record. The dilemma now is we're not getting reimbursed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I think that people who call for an ambulance, under some circumstances, are asked to pay. Is that right?
I believe that's correct.
All right, thank you.
I think it was Dyson. Mr. Gates?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to speak to the question whether there are different rates for different areas of the municipality for EMS service. We did have some code changes, so there's that. We have a different rate for municipal residents and municipal non-residents. the municipal provided service. We also have a provision about service EMS services from Jukia, a volunteer for our department. So there is a little difference. It's 1695.70.
Okay.
Plus
Thank you,
there's a
Mr.
per mile charge, and so there will be a difference if you're coming from far away.
Thank you, Mr. Gate. Mr. Croft, and then I'd like us to continue with this presentation. Mr. Croft?
So Lance, all the other numbers, except the marijuana, are differences from 18 budget. Marijuana's a total, you said the difference there is only 0.5,
Correct.
3.54.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Continue, Mr. Wilbur, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on revenue sharing, just very briefly, we had originally budgeted about 7.8 million in 18. When the legislature concluded, we received 6.1. We are going to use that 6.1 as the revenue sharing to be received for 19. We have some proposed fee increases. The administration is preparing an omnibus ordinance for your consideration. It will have 3 primary areas in it. Development services, proposing to modify some of their fees. That total amount's about 170,000, a little bit more than that. Planning has got some modifications. It's about 40,000 in total, and then the fire department has another 75,000 in theirs. And for the fire department, it's related to community right to know as it relates to hazardous waste, and it also has some increases in inspections from the fire inspector, whether it's an inspection or a re-inspection. And so and I know that those have not been modified for 8 years. I think the fire department's last time they modified those in 2010. So we're working to prepare that for you as part of this budget process. I put dividends on here. While I noted that it's changes, the one I wanted to note for you at this point right now, we're not seeing in this proposed budget any pluses or minuses in the dividends that we will be receiving from the utilities. Right now, we receive a dividend from solid waste. We receive a small dividend from the port. Nothing from AWU, nothing from MLMP, and nothing from Merrifield. So we won't see any changes in there from the revenue side.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
If
Mr. Dyson.
Chugiak sale process goes through, in the out years, will we likely see more from the dividend?
So
I've forgotten how that's structured. We get something, I think.
So depending on how that would work out, is in lieu of a dividend, there would be an annual payment.
Yeah, what was the magnitude of that?
It would be,
Just rough.
I don't know, I have to defer to Mr. Paul, I think it's 6 or 7.
I don't know that we know that number yet, because part will decide it'll depend on what the Assembly wants to do with the money. So the money can be used to pay off municipal debts in the first instance, and then the remainder goes into the trust. We know the magnitude of the dividend that will be spun off is the allowable dividend from the trust, which is either 4.25% or 5% if you allow now that the trust is recharged. But it will depend on whether the Assembly wants to take all that money and pay off all of the SAP debt, or pay off all of the bonds. So I don't know the number. If you assume that we're paying only transaction costs and then putting the rest of the balance in the trust, I think that's right. I think it's single low digits millions. Look at that, single low digits millions.
But Mr. Falsey, maybe I misunderstood Mr. Dyson's question, but I think he was also talking about the dividend we lost from the RCA that would be replaced by not the payment in lieu in taxes, but the other ongoing payments. Correct?
Order of magnitude, that's about a $7 or $8 million annual dividend.
So that's another.
The thing that replaces the lost dividend enjoined by the RCA is new dividends from the MOA trust.
Oh, interesting. I thought there was a separate revenue stream. Okay.
Payment of the taxes.
But that's replacing MISA. Right? Yeah. Okay. Mr. Trainee.
Lance, on the revenue changes, didn't we get $11 million more projected to come in 2019 for the motor fuels tax?
So that's...
Wouldn't that appear somewhere around here?
So we have a lot of changes in the motor fuel. I mean, obviously, motor fuel is inside the cap. Last year, in 2018, we budgeted 11.7 or 4. This year, we're budgeting 14 for a full year. So when you look at all of the other revenues, particularly the non-property tax revenues, I think tobacco is down, marijuana is up, motor vehicles down a little bit.
But the fuel tax will show up in the subsequent slides.
Yeah, I didn't put motor fuel on here because motor fuel, well, actually, I will mention motor fuel when we talk about what the cost of the taxpayers when we get to.
My goal is to let the taxpayers know their tax will be reduced for that money come in. That's when the administration, and I brought this forward. Just want to make sure the public understands it will reduce tax.
I have just the slide for you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
A comment.
Mr. Welton?
I think we need to never use that phrase, will reduce taxes, because what people interpreted was with that fuel tax went in effect and their taxes would go down, but in fact their taxes did not go down this year.
The taxes
Now,
will
the
go down
fuel
this
tax
year, the
put
property
down
taxes.
pressure, and they grew less because of that fuel tax, but people heard my taxes will be reduced, and they weren't, and now they know we lied to them. That's the interpretation. So that's a dangerous phrase.
When your mouth is moving, we're lying.
We did not lie to them, but you're right.
No, but that's the
Perhaps there-
interpretation. I get that all the time.
Yeah. All right, continue, Mr. Wilbur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let me talk about some of the highlighted changes that the administration has proposed in their budget. There are some pluses and some minuses. The administration is proposing, as it relates to public safety, and we'll talk mostly about police and fire here. On the fire side and police, we're proposing 2 attrition academies. For APD, there will be an attrition academy in 2019 for the fire department. They have an academy that they were going to start this year. It's a little bit late. We're going to move that into early 2019, so they will finish that academy. We are proposing some resources for some non-sworn on the police side. Depending on where the chief feels where they might want to allocate those resources, whether they be in dispatch or whether they be in evidence or clerks. We're proposing that they have the opportunity to do that. We also include a new expense, which is the annual cost of the lease and the update and the payments for the new APD headquarters downtown. The sum of those 3 is $3 million. The headquarters piece is about 2.4 of that. We've already talked about the contributions that we're making into the police public safety retirement. About $3 million of that is in police, and about a little less than about $2 million of that is in fire. Remember I mentioned while we have one-time things that we take out, in 2019 we continue the one-time, we added back in one-time housing and homelessness, and so a combination of cleanup is about $150,000, and then the homelessness, which would keep the mobile intervention team moving, that would be a part of that. So a combination of those two is about $500,000. We are proposing to add $500,000 to transit. The transit department has a contractual service to run the neighborhood service. This proposal would bring that contractual effort in-house, which would then also raise the number of bus drivers inside transit. And speaking with the new transit director, and we have an opportunity to provide better service. We've heard some complaints from either passengers or others. Currently, we dispatch that service, but we don't manage the drivers, though we manage the contractor. So I know that there'll be some more conversation about that. We're proposing to bring that in-house. Libraries, this plus $200,000 is to, as you recall, last year in 18, through the 1 quarter process, the Assembly added some money to keep Sunday service open. This budget proposes to keep Sunday service open at about $200,000. There's a little bit of that money is going to the library to pay back debt and to maintain the new automated handling system that they put in place. Code abatement, we put $200,000 in the 18 budget. We're going to add $1 million in the 19 budget. Any money they don't spend in 18, the administration is looking if there's a way we can just roll that into 19. SAP, the reason I put SAP on here is that the proposed budget does not add any additional costs that are not already in a continuation budget of IT.
That's what I wanted.
Yeah, we've got a question here, but I'm sorry, you said 1 million, did you mean 100,000 for
100,000.
code abatement? Okay.
Thanks.
Just making sure. Mr. Trainee, you had a question about SAP?
SAP, aren't we hiring 17 people to work SAP within the IT department?
So, yes, Mr. Trainee, so what this number includes is the IT director.
Did you ask yours?
This continues to implement the plan that she shared with the Assembly's Budget and Finance Committee, which is to create a core group of staff inside IT, in addition to supporting selected contractual services. And she has done that by looking at some of the other expenses she's had on the enterprise, the way in which we are managing our servers. And so the 2019 budget has a proposal of no increase in IT specifically, or no increase in the budget specifically for SAP.
So we have Ms. Browse wants to speak to that, and then also Mr. Constant was in the. Oh, you weren't in the queue? For some reason I thought you were. Okay, Mr. Welton and Mr. Rivera.
I was just going to clarify and sort of steal Susie's thunder here a little bit, because we didn't get to the full presentation on the SAP team restructure at the last Budget and Finance Committee meeting, but the comparison between the 17, 18, and 19 SAP costs has the 19 SAP costs going down significantly because of the transition from consultants to internal staff. So.
Thank you, Ms. Browse. Mr. Welton?
A couple things. One is, it's a little frustrating here in the library that we had to put more money in because of the new book handling, because the idea there was it would be cheaper, less labor. Why do we do that if it's not cheaper?
So we had to buy it. I mean, it cost us $400,000 to buy the thing, and we have to maintain it. And so we're paying back the money that we borrowed to buy it, and we have money to maintain it. I think it's about 80,000 of that 200,000.
But we have to increase the library's budget to pay for that. What was the point of doing it? Why not just have staff do it then if it was cheaper?
Through the chair, it's not cheaper. The loan, the master loan that we used to finance the AMHS, we did not have to pay on that last year. So what you're seeing is items that were not required last year but are required now count as ads. It's a very small portion of the ad that we're proposing for the library this year to make the automated handling payments. The bulk of it is to the Assembly in Q1 last year appropriated money to the library system to help keep them staffed appropriately for Sunday hours, etc. Because that was a 1Q appropriation, it doesn't show up in a continuation budget, which means we have to show it as an ad this time. We want to maintain that same level of service, but we have to show it as an addition to the budget.
Okay. So I can't, on housing and homeless, so this is 500, half a million, 500,000.
Right.
That's not even close to what we need to make a dent in this issue. Why not add 5 million? I mean, it's.
If you've got $5 million, we'll take it.
Well, I'm just saying. I mean, that's trivial. Why don't we take shrink the libraries, cut all the flowers, and do everything we have to bump that up? Because that's, again, the perception is we are doing nothing, and it is
It's an inaccurate perception.
Well,
And
maybe
then I
so,
look at-
but it's enough. We have a huge problem, and it's being dealt with kind of sorta, and we need to totally focus on that. I mean, that's the demands, and I'm kind of ending up that way.
Forrest.
Mr. Constant, and then Mr. Rivera was in the queue.
Thank you.
I'm not sure how we get there functionally, but some years ago, 2012, a group of us advocated really hard in Juneau and fought for, in the capital budget, $5 million that was cut at the last minute to $4 million and handed to another entity. But through the capital budget, a substantial array of piloted services were funded for the homeless issue in Anchorage. And what I would like us to figure out how to do is propose a bond that would really substantially infuse cash into an operating system that would achieve your goal, but not take money from police and fire and libraries. And so I'm in agreement that we have to tackle it, but we have to tackle it with new money. And it's just going to be really hard to do that. And so I would like us to figure out how to use the bonding power and the public will to do something to translate that into the resources to actually take it to the next level.
Mr. Rivera, you were in the queue.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. A few things. First, thank you to the administration for including that money in for the libraries. That was an important priority of mine in the last budget. I'm glad to see it here. So 3 questions. First, on transit, bringing that anchor rides contract in-house. I assume that's what that is?
No, it's actually the anchor rides contractor for the people mover service, not the ADA service.
Okay. So I would like to get, I don't know if this has been presented to PTAB or not, the Public Transit Advisory Board, but I would like to get them to look at this and provide the Assembly with a resolution on their thoughts. Then second, on the housing and homelessness, this is, as my colleagues know, something that my committee is going to be discussing in October. So feel free, any ideas that we have them ready for that October meeting. I think it's going to be a hefty one. And then third, on the public safety piece, so $3 million, $2.4 million in the new APD headquarters. About how much are we talking about for non-sworn? Was that going to get us?
300.
And was that going to get us?
3 people.
Have we done an analysis of approximately how many people we actually need?
I would leave that to the chief. This is the amount. I mean, when you're looking at what we have the ability to do, or at least based on the priorities, and again, it's assuming we want to do what we don't do the libraries, or we make a different choice on transit, or we make a different choice on code abatement, and those resources could be redirected to public safety. But then we have a challenge with days and hours of service in the library, how we deal with transit, and how we deal with code abatement. So our proposal is trying to strike a balance of meeting the needs of the core services and trying to add where we've heard that additional resources are required. It might not be to the level in which people are looking for, but we are constrained.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think the more knowledge we have to better make these decisions, the better. Thank you.
Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. I remember when I was in the Q4 before. It's on the public safety line. Question, you mentioned 2.4 million of that 3 is the new headquarters. We've heard the number consistently that it's a $1.5 million lease. So that is about a $900,000 difference.
So the 2.4, I could get the breakdown of the lease costs, the utilities, the heat, the maintenance, all of the things. The other cost that actually is required to stay in that building, the lease is not 2.4. That 2.4 is a combination of everything it's going to take, and I can get you a breakdown of how that is done.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As long as we're talking about public safety, I thought we were hiring some new 911 operators. Is that included?
That's the non-sworn.
Yeah. That's not. So we're only hiring 3 non-sworn. I thought we needed another 10 or 12 911 operators.
I'm not sure what the need is, but when we're looking at the resources that we have, if we put 10 non-sworns, then that number is going to be $1.5 million. And we could reallocate, but our proposal doesn't do that.
Plus, we also were told we need to hire an additional number of people to work at the headquarters to get caught up on back filings of cases and information from officers.
Evidence clerks.
Is that included in this?
No. What's included is 3 non-sworns, an academy, in addition to pay for the move downtown.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. We got Mr. Trainee and then Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Lance, on non-sworn, would you have the chief break down whether we're talking about dispatch or we're talking about evidence? Because I know they need more evidence non-sworn.
Honestly, it's up to the chief.
I know. I'm just telling you now. Please break that down for me. And can we take money from the homeless to move it into the evidence? Because a lot of the stuff we're finding that goes to evidence department is from homeless camps. So I want to figure out how we can deal with that. Because three non-sworns, they're not even worth the paperwork it's written on. So I want to talk to Chief and find out what you're really talking about. 3's not going to do anything. Okay. And then going back to Chris Constant, if you do a bond, please make it a standalone. Don't tie it to something we really need, because that's not going to survive the public. Thank you.
Okay, continue with the presentation. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Quinn Davidson, and then please, I'd like to see that last point talked about.
My point is just really similar to everyone else's, that it'd be nice to know what they want as part of deciding what they should get.
So when we provide the budget, budget to you on Tuesday, it will have that by line. I mean, honestly, we're giving the chief as much flexibility as he would like. We could put them all in one, or one particular area, spread them out.
Really quick.
Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. LaFrance made a good suggestion, and I'd like to ask Mr. Dyson if in our next public safety meeting that this be fully scoped out and addressed regarding the non-sworns and getting a report from the chief.
Yeah, I think our meeting's next week. Tuesday.
Wednesday,
Yeah.
11 o'clock.
Great.
Yeah, Felix, write down a note for me or email me a note.
Sure.
Exactly what you want.
Thank
And
you.
then we need to work to get with Ms. Honest to get that a part of the notification and notify the folks who should know.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Will do.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Okay, Mr. Wilbur, that last point I'm very curious about.
Yes. So, in order to add the things that we are proposing here, given the resources that we have, we asked departments to give us proposed reductions, and we looked over time on the department reductions that have occurred,
This is for
both
next
in
year.
the staff levels and in dollar amounts. And frankly, every department has taken a reduction in the last 3 years, and for the most part in the last 6 years. So this was a very hard thing to do. So what we are proposing in this one, as it relates to APD, while we are going to be adding some money for academies and non-sworns and the headquarters, we are proposing that we would reduce their overtime as part of the budget. So that is one piece, and that's about $1.5 million of that $6 million number. We also looked at the fire department. In the fire department, while over time, most recently, we've added ambulance service, we've added 2 more ambulances, we've added equipment and other services to them. We are proposing that we would close 1 apparatus. We have done that in the past. We've done that intermittently. And where that apparatus would be, if it would be at one station or another, one station or move around, the chief is still working on this one. These 2 things are very difficult, but if we want to be able to accomplish some of these other things and contribute to the support to APD where we can, those are the things that we would need to do. That would be about $2 million. The result of that would not be any layoffs to any firefighters. What they would do is they would reallocate their resources, as they've been looking at right now, between fire and ambulance. And so that is the proposal that's in this proposed budget. Whether it's a one-time event or whether it's something that we continue into the future, I know that the administration and the chief are interested in that. The other thing is the fire department is actively looking at their current resource allocation. They do spend a lot more time on the emergency medical than they do on fire. They are they're working on a report. We have apparatus out of 56,000 calls that happen in a year. We have apparatus that are called 12 times. They are paid, that apparatus costs the same amount as one that's called out 600 times. So I know that will be a discussion. The balance of those, there are reductions all across the municipality and other departments that will continue to receive those. And so, we have them in general government services, support services. We have them in the manager's office. We have them some in planning, some in finance. They're all over the board, and we will share those. You'll see those in specific detail again. Over the years, we have been doing everything we can to reduce support services to build up our public safety, and I think we've done a great job. We've been to do that. We've added over $14 million in public safety in 3 years. And so I think there are no more significant reductions that can be made without significant loss in core services. So that's what we have in the proposal. And again, this is difficult, but that is where we are right now.
Mr. Trainee, then Ms. LaFrance.
Lance, could you ask the chief of police to come to the public safety meeting and explain how he's going to get $1 million saved in reduction of overtime? Because I'm sure the criminals are not going to reduce their demand. And so what do? I want to know exactly what this man's going to have to cut on the APD to make this thing work out. We're just shoving it off to second, third quarter budget revision the following year. Thank you.
Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have to ask, because this keeps coming up, has the flower budget already been cut?
The flower budget.
Or
Flower budget, there's no
Fred's
proposed
here.
reductions in the flower budget.
It's beautification
You
of the
becoming
city
a
as a
flower
whole.
Think plastic, Fred.
No, I mean, it just keeps coming up, and it's been suggested that that's, an area that could be reduced to fund other priorities, and we want to know if it had already been reduced in this budget.
There are,
Still flat from last
frankly,
year.
there are not. No.
Mr. Dyson.
As I understood it, the department, there's no activity we're going to quit doing.
Correct.
Okay. Perhaps for others, but certainly for me, when looking at this, and it would be neat if there was a forward slash and the total amount of that budget was with it. So I could see it 3 million is part of 46. It'd just be helpful. Also, you've probably done this and it's easily available, but it would help me if I had a picture that showed all the liabilities we have that we can't avoid, certainly retirement, and our deficits on those retirements that we can't avoid, and I suspect there's some other things like there. And then the things that are kind of hanging over our head just helps me get a bigger picture. Certainly the port comes to mind. And maybe some big dollar suits out there that are against us, and some ones that we have a chance to maybe recover some more. It just helps me get a big picture of that stuff. Forgive me if you're, as usual, you're generally way ahead of me.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. I mean, I look forward to a lot more detail on that 5.9. I'm sure it'll be broken out. I'm also curious, if we're adding $200,000 to the library, not really adding, but continuing, but then simultaneously asking them for a budget cut, the library, they're not one of the departments we're asking for that reduction.
No
Okay.
reductions in the library, no reductions in transit.
Okay.
Flowers, we're not.
I want to ask them the question.
Okay, Mr. Trainee, and then
Lance, are we projecting to cut the assembly budget as part of this?
No, as a matter of fact, the Assembly had asked for money to support the elections.
Yep.
It was like $60,000 or something like that for 2, and those are incorporated in the proposed budget.
Lance, could you break down for me housing and homeless? I want to know exactly what that $500,000 is going to. Just break it down for me if you would.
We can do that.
Mr. Croft.
Yes, so Lance, so 1.5 in overtime reduction in police, I guess I can see that as possible with new staffing, you will rely less on overtime. It's a little counterintuitive that more people will need less overtime. But I worry, as Mr. Trainee does, that it might be just our estimate of overtime and shifting it to budget revisions, but I'm willing at least to see how that rides out. But I don't understand the 2 million reduction in the firefighter budget with no reductions in personnel. That's the vast majority of all of them.
So I didn't say there would be reduction in personnel, I said there would be no layoffs.
Okay, you're doing it through attrition. So fewer, and they're gonna, isn't that gonna mean more overtime in the same way that more APD officers means less? You're just gonna have to cover it with overtime. There's been situations, the fire chief has testified to us, where all our apparatuses, or at least all our medical, were out. So if we have one fewer.
So medical will be different than an apparatus. So we're talking an engine or a tender or something like that. But obviously, I mean, we know that you're interested when we do the detailed budget presentations, when we start that, And obviously, the questions that come in before then, we'll be able to prepare responses for those. When we have our department reviews, starting on October 19th, we will be starting with public safety right off the bat, and that's when we'll have both chiefs there to help. The questions that you have before then, they will be prepared to respond to those.
Thank you. Ms. Browse.
I was just going to clarify for Mr. Trainee what the 500,000 is currently dedicated for. 150,000 of it is to renew the funding that the Assembly put in during their amendments last year for Parks and Rec and camp cleanup. And the other 350,000 is to go to support the mobile intervention team that has been working on the streets to reduce the calls for public safety over the last year.
Oh no, but none of, if you let me, Mr. Chairman. Oh no, none of this is going to provide home housing for the homeless?
There is some funding in there for overflow shelter, but not housing.
Okay. And we ran out of money on what date for Parks and Rec to clean up the homeless camps? The 27th of September?
Mr. Shooty may be able to answer that.
Mr. Shooty?
Today.
Okay, today. So what's the plan between now and this budget would take place in January? What's the process to clean up the camps now?
From here on out, the camp cleanups will be coordinated like they have been all year through community work service. But that puts us at the mercy of the volume of people that are serving, not serving time, that are being, doing their community work service. Sorry. At least until such time as we have an approved budget for 2019, we can start planning ahead for rehiring.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Constant,
Yeah,
Mr. Peterson, Mr. Weddleton.
Point that Ms. Browse made, that a small portion of that goes to fund the overflow shelter. So that's the only piece that is used for any kind of housing that I'm aware of.
Mr. Peterson.
I'm good, thanks.
Mr. Weddleton.
So how much is in the budget for storing homeless people's stuff?
Currently, there is no allocation for storing homeless people's stuff.
Do you have an idea what that will cost?
No, we're working on that estimate right now.
Mr. Dyson.
Yeah. So here's a Gordian knot that works against public interest. Many of the public unions, when it comes to a question of overtime, it goes to the people with the most seniority, and that's why you go to Sullivan Arena and see a APD officer directing traffic on overtime. It's one of the longest serving guys there, and it ends up being more costly because the senior officers get more money, but it also really distorts the system. And I don't know how you go from where we're at in all those contracts, and that seniority is the deciding factor for who gets the overtime. But it's really a disincentive to the public interest, and I think particularly the new employees who probably have significant more needs. And so I would enjoy probably offline to this discussion if there's a way, any way that other jurisdictions have dealt with that. But it does have a, at least on the margins, an impact on the budget, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Constant.
Thanks. Yeah, briefly, Mr. Wilton, the framework around the storage at this time is pretty interesting. We don't need a lease. It's containers. And the containers are sited at the MLMP transfer station, so we don't even have to land lease. Solid waste service transfer station. And there are explorations of how to work with solid waste staff that are paid for at the utility to figure out how they can take their part on. So, and the most surprising element of the first zone-based abatement was when it came time to store the goods, there was nobody there to store the goods for because the message got out, you can't be here. And so, anyhow, it's a very interesting piece of the pie. It's maybe not going to be as damaging as was previously anticipated.
Okay, if you can continue, Mr. Wilbur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to switch gears from the operating budget to the capital budget. So the administration is proposing a capital budget, and this is primarily related to the bonds. It does not include money that might be coming from other sources. It does not include any federal money. Because focusing primarily on the 2019 projects that would be bond funded. So the top group of projects is facilities, and the administration is proposing about $8.5 million. That's about $3 million more than we did last year. The focus of that is on 3 primary areas. About $3 million of that 8.5 is to work with the Anchorage and Chugiak senior centers. We have some safety issues inside both facilities. There's some roofing, some bathrooms, some parking, garage things that they want to modify out in those facilities. So that's about $3 million of it. $3 million of it is the continuation of communications, area-wide communications upgrade for public safety. Warren, we heard about that last year. About $1 million of it is to replace the 4 elevators in the Lusac Library. And then the balance of that is to replace a roof over at Porcupine, where the municipality has a building that nonprofits use. I believe they use it for education and some kind of a youth programs that go on in there. There's a little bit of money for the Girdwood Library, and I can't remember the third item, but most of the facilities are the senior centers, the communications, and the elevators. Fire department, this would include 5 pieces of apparatus, 2 replacement ambulances, a replacement engine, a replacement ladder truck, and another vehicle that they use. It's called a decontamination vehicle. When they fight a fire, they put their equipment into a vehicle and they take it to another location and store it. Right now they're using a modified paratransit vehicle. It's probably 15 years old, and that will be part of this. It also includes their request for life packs and some air pack equipment. So that's a little bit more than last year's fire request. Parks and Recreation, up about $300,000. It looks very much like the Parks and Rec projects from last year. It's trails, signage, ADA improvements, inclusive playgrounds.
Parking lots?
There's some parking lots in there. A variety of improvements there. The police department, this $3.5 million is a remodel of the ground floor of the existing headquarters building. As they move from that location to the location downtown, they will remodel the downstairs over there to store evidence and revise their crime lab piece. So that will be part of that remodel. Roads and traffic, it's down about $500,000 compared to last year's road and traffic bond. Major projects, Rika, Country Woods, there's a variety of projects all across there. And then, there's a lot of Academy Drive, the right-of-way first hit for Academy Drive is on there. So there's a lot of, and then some typical annual drainage programs. Transit, this one is up from last year. The transit department is fortunate enough to be, there are more federal monies available so that they could do more things. That requires more match. And so this would be a match requirement for there. So the total bond amount as proposed by the administration is $54.5 million, and a blend of those particular areas, $54.5 million in those areas. So there will be obviously a detailed list of these projects. A couple things I do want to point out to the Assembly. When you receive your capital improvement budget, one of the things that we did this year is when you read the comments section, if the community council submitted a priority list, we noted which community council it was and which priority it was. So when you're reading that, if you want to know if Ocean View, Old Sword Ocean View had 120th Avenue was their #1 priority, you go to 120th, it'll say #1 priority Ocean View, or if it's a project in many places, you'll see that too. So we had, I think, 17 of the community councils submit survey responses this year as opposed to 9 last year.
Great. So there's a few people in the queue. I'm going to start. I remember Mr. Weddleton proposed and we passed an extra $500,000 for traffic calming. Is that included in this?
I think the traffic calming, in 18 we did that.
Is
in
it?
19 we did not. And
Okay.
one of the reasons that we did not is we, in working with the traffic department, is they have a lot of traffic calming money already in the bank. And you know, the spend rate at which they have, want to make sure that that is being managed before we add any more. So we're working with the traffic department to confirm that. It's $500,000 in the 19 capital program.
Oh, it is. Okay.
It
Oh,
is.
okay. So you put an additional. Okay, I got you. All right. So we have Mr. Trenny, then Ms. Quinn Davidson, and then Mr. Constant.
Lance, on the library, you said they want to upgrade the elevators?
4 of them, correct.
Not the one that somebody comes out of and goes up, because the remodeling just did that.
I don't know
For that
where
one.
they are.
Through the chair, no, sir. There's actually 4 original elevators in the internal dead center in the middle of the building that are behind the circulation desk. If you come in, walk past the automated handling machine and the stairs where staff sits, there's there's 2 service elevators and 2 public elevators in there that are the originals.
I just wanted to make sure we weren't going to redo one we just did with the last remodeling. Another thing with the police department, talking to police chiefs over the years, they wanted to harden the entryway to APD because right now it's susceptible to somebody coming in with a bomb blowing up in front of APD. Are they looking at this hardening that facility?
I don't know the particulars about what the remodel would be, but
Can you find out for me?
I will say with the remodel of the Elmore site, it's important to recognize that you have to do that somewhat in conjunction with the downtown headquarters, because we're now able to use the Elmore facility as storage. Had we not done that, we would have had to spend tens of millions of dollars to acquire additional storage. And so you need to tell that story together. That we are saving a lot of money by moving headquarters downtown because now we can use the Elmore site for storage.
Thanks, Jason. I appreciate this. I appreciate your foresight. I just wanted to make sure in a couple of years we don't have to come back and ask the people for more money to try and harden the site on
I
the Tudor
hope
Road.
you're able to come back in a couple of years, Mr. Chairman.
I won't be, but who knows? I haunt the place. Thank you, Lance.
That's funny. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Lance, you mentioned that there was going to be a reduction of 1 apparatus in the operating budget,
Right.
but then you mentioned adding apparatuses, if that's the proper
they're replacing
plural.
they're replacing existing ones. I think they have 50 pieces of equipment.
But then they're getting rid of one as part of a reduction. So how does that,
So they would take one out of service.
and then buy a new one?
So they have, so what they would do is they have, I can't remember, 50 plus pieces of equipment, and they would replace those. If they have one piece of apparatus that is, that they take out of service, and part of what they're trying to do here is they have some equipment that's really old. And I'll just say they try to keep it, replace it after 150,000 or 10 years. So this is to replace those equipment. If there's an opportunity in the event that the assembly and the budget is approved, or we take an apparatus out, and then that would then mean we would need to purchase less equipment, then we will make that adjustment. But I would defer to the chief on how she's managing her fleet.
Okay, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. So, Lance, you mentioned that the community council priorities will be attached to projects that are listed. Recall last year, all my community councils didn't get into the survey. Somehow they put them in, but there was a glitch. But in every year prior to that, somehow magically every year, projects not priorities of the council were somehow fed into the council priority list and identified as council priorities.
So, 2 things. Whatever projects are being proposed or are underway from agencies or other councils, but primarily by other agencies, if we have projects that are in adopted plans and the department wants to propose those, we give the community councils the list of the projects. They prioritize those, and then sometimes they add new projects. And they basically say, the project I want to do is not on that list. Some of those projects that are on that list, they don't prioritize, but that doesn't mean that they don't make it into the capital budget.
No, it's been the other way around, where they've said delete for 5 years, it's never been deleted, or projects just appear that were never vetted through the council list, but do appear on the council priority list after the fact. So I'm just raising that as an ongoing concern. But I can't tell with the new system if it's been kind of fixed, that problem.
So the projects that we give the community councils in the early part of the year in March, and then they have to give us a reply by the end of May. Unless there is something from the assembly or the administration or a major break or something new, there might be 1 or 2% brand new projects that show up between when the council submits it and when we give this proposed budget. So there is a possibility that there are new projects, but it's pretty small in total.
Maybe I've just been lucky.
Okay, all right, continue.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I only have a couple more here, and then we'll get some big questions here. So
Sure.
on the summary, this is on the operating budget. So our total budget, when we started, we approved a 2018 budget, and then we modified it in 1Q. Again, the 2018 budget, after the first quarter adjustments, that's the starting point for moving forward into our 19 budget. The difference between our 2018 1Q and our proposed budget is now we're at 522 million. The staffing number is up a little bit in total, and what you'll see is under the public safety, you'll notice that the number that's down is the net of and public safety, the apparatus from the fire department. The non-public safety increase from 18 to 19 is primarily in transit, while there's a couple others in other places as well. So as it relates to when we calculate the property taxes, we look at the cap, we look at all of the non-property tax revenues that we receive, if those numbers are going up or going down, that's where we start. Whatever is left is what we apply to property taxes. At 1Q, when we set the budget, we were at 283.5. This one would be 284 million, which if you apply that $500,000, it's a little more than $5, but in this presentation I put it's less than $10 for a $350,000 house. That's what the proposed budget has in it. Obviously, marijuana outperforms, or people buy more fuel, or anything in the non-property tax goes up, then the property tax number will go down, and then the cost of the taxpayer will go down.
Mr. Constant?
Yes, so this then is the point at which we're looking at 283.5, which is the first quarter approved number. So then between those two numbers, is this where we insert the $3 or $6 million?
Yep, it's part of all of that.
It's already calculated in the 284?
Yes. Yep, because it's calculated in the 522, the total budget.
And so what number did you use for your assumption for the difference? Use 3. Okay.
You say $10, you mean annually or monthly?
Annually.
Great. Mr. Dyson?
Thank you. So in one of our upcoming meetings here, and probably early on, I'd like to know your back of the envelope and estimate of what's happened to the assessed property value.
To do that.
And I'm just driving around seeing all the vacant commercial property, mostly low-end stuff. And, the net population we've lost, I suspect we'll see the assessed value having gone down. And maybe you know, probably can tell me now, but how much does the reality of what's going on in the real estate market and prices, how long does that take? What's the timeline between when that is reflected in our assessed value?
I can talk to the assessor, but when we do the assessed evaluations, we take a point in time, which is at the end of the year.
So what you will give us in this deliberation is 2018?
Yep. And then when we set the tax cap in March or in May, we will have the end as of December 31st, 2018. That's the assessed valuation we will use to apply the mill rate for 19.
Yeah, and I should have known that. But you got a feel for what's happened to the total assessed value of the acreage?
I would have to refer to the assessor.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Dyson, the Property Appraisal Department typically does and can do an annual presentation on what had happened to assess property value throughout the bowl. in setting the 2019 budget, the guidance that was given from that department is that it is slightly down.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, I would recommend that we don't need a lot of effort, but second decimal accuracy would be fine for us, I think.
Yeah, Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I am looking at the 120-day memo, and I just want Mr. Wilbur, if you could help me understand this. So there are just 2 points I want to bring up. Where you talk about the preliminary limit of all taxes that can be collected for 2019 is estimated to be up 7.6 million, and that the limit on property taxes that can be collected is down 0.8 million. Can you help me sort of understand that in this context?
Sure. So we made those estimates in June. And we made them in July, and we put the memo together in August and decided them. So things move, and that's how come the difference.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. All right, if you can continue, Mr. Wilbur, we have a few minutes left.
Mr. Chairman. So on the utilities and enterprises, I just want to point out a couple of things here. We're working with the utilities to wrap some things up. Under AWU, I don't think any significant changes in their total dollar amount of their budget. However,
we're selling one of them.
We do propose. They are proposing some rate changes, rate increases, probably in their water and their wastewater. And we'll get the utilities to talk more about that. Merrill Field, we're actually at OMB right now, really helping Merrill Field button things up. They have a new finance person and a new director. And so, but right now, Merrill Field, other than some modification into their debt service as it relates to, they are going to be borrowing some money in order to take advantage of a huge amount of FAA money to come to them that they need to provide match for, so we're working with them. ML&P, you probably know more about that one than an ML&P on this one here. Whatever their proposed budget is, we'll bring that one forward. Both for AWU and for ML&P, we're not anticipating a dividend for either one of those. Port of Alaska, I don't think any significant changes in there. And SWS, right now in their proposal, until the Assembly takes action on the land and the lease, and they actually move forward with that, their 19 budget will look very much like 18, and if they have any changes there, I have to remind myself, I don't recall if they actually have a proposed rate increase. I think they do have a small rate adjustment. I'll confirm that one. But for the most part, I think the utilities are going to be pretty much the same, except for AWU. And so we'll learn more about those. And then, very briefly, Mr. Chairman, we talked about all of these things. Number 3, I didn't bring up. I just want to let you know that the budget does not have any reductions in snow removal. The budget that AWU or that street maintenance had in 2018 was like $10 million in snow removal. We gave them another $500,000 in the event they want to do some special cleanup. In 2019, we're not giving them the extra $500,000, but we're not cutting their original $10 million.
But wasn't I'm trying to think, how does that compare to the 2017 budget? Had it been reduced and then we put money back in?
Yep. Yes, and so what we did in 18, we built it back up and then we added more.
Okay, so we are not going under the 2017 number. Okay.
Yeah, I'll confirm on the
Snow is
17.
only going to land on trails this year.
That's the plan. Yeah, good.
Yeah. And
We might not even have snow this year.
And I've talked to
Global warming.
I talked to the street maintenance director, and obviously the weather is favorable in their budget. Talked about cleanup, transit, libraries, and then just to remind the assembly that while we are proposing to make a significant investment in infrastructure, both in vertical and horizontal assets that we have in the municipality. There's no significant changes in the 19 proposed budget as it relates to ML&P, and depending on how that turns out. And when it turns out, we will definitely be making adjustments to our budget, whether that's in the first quarter or sometime after that, or later in 2019. Again, we've presented you with a balanced budget. We've had to make some tough selections and some recommendations. And so now we will work forward with the Assembly on proposed changes or modifications through your process, the public hearing process, and then last peak here is our schedule. Again, we'll give it to you on Tuesday. All 3 budgets will deliver to the clerk. Our first public work session on the 19th. We'll start with general government. We'll start with public safety and general government. And then the first public hearing, you can read the rest. Note to the Assembly, as you may already know this, November 7th is a Wednesday. It's a special meeting, so that is the day of the special of the public hearing because November 6th is election day. And then November 14th and 16th, that's up to you, but those are some target dates for when you want to have your submissions due. And then we're tentatively scheduled to have a budget approved on November 20th. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer those. And obviously, in the meantime, if you want to send me your questions, I'll work with the director so we can be prepared to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. Mr. Train and Mr. Mr. Peterson, then Mr. Train. Sorry, Dick.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was looking at SWS. We've been talking about bear-resistant garbage cans. Is their rate going to go up slightly because they're going to provide more of those, or are we planning possibly to go citywide with bear-resistant cans?
Through the chair, Mr. Peterson, I will check with Mr. Spafford to find out, first of all, will there be a rate increase, and second of all, what's it for? But
I apologize. You're going to get a lot of detail from SWS on their rate modeling in the utility and enterprise committee meetings for the next 2 of those sessions. They are planning a rate increase, and it is a small percentage rate increase. And there are 2 reasons for that. One is part of the central transfer station proposal. I'll give you that. And second is, even in the absence of that, we can really whip the financial modeling of SWS into a much sharper shape than it was previously. And you'll see that the net revenues of the utility start to go negative and don't recover unless there is a rate increase. So there's a baseline rate increase, and it has the central transfer station project added.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Ms. LaFrance. I'm sorry, Mr. Train and Ms. LaFrance.
Lance, years ago, Fred and I were on at the same time, say 91, 95 time frame. We get the budget, and it would have funding levels on it. If we reduced it by 5 or 10%, this is what the departments would have to cut out to meet that. Would you take a look at all the departments except public safety for me, take a 5% reduction, and tell me how that would change what they're trying to deliver? Fred can tell you what it looked like because we did have that document. Remember, Fred, the budget?
Yeah, it was called service level.
And it was a nice way to look at this budget. I wish we still had it.
And it's laborious to produce.
But it's an excellent product, Fred.
You want to turn all the street lights on an hour later. This is what you saved, and so on. And who was in charge when you guys did away with that?
I don't remember.
Ever since, haven't you?
You weren't on the body, neither was I when they did away with it. It was a bad decision. If you do that for me, Lance, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Cheryl Fresca was the budget, and she's still here in town, and knowledgeable and fun lady.
It gave the same a lot more options. Thank
Well
you.
aware of the process. I was subject to Cheryl's math.
Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 questions. Lance, in order to have the CAFR 2 weeks before November 20th, we need it on November 6th.
Okay.
And is that date still looking good as far as you know?
I would think that is our goal, and we are working toward it. Yep.
For the record, that was our new CFO, Mr. Slifka.
And second question, if you wouldn't mind returning to fund balance, could you explain what exactly goes into fund balance, into the savings? And I just preface that I had initially misunderstood. I thought fund balance pretty much entirely consisted of the operations side of the budget and whatever we came in under, but it sounds like it has other sources.
So, it's a very simple, like 17-step calculation process. No, just kidding. So, when we fund balance is it's basically generated for 2 purposes, but one primarily. It's to make sure that we have enough savings in the bank for our bond rate. That's an important piece. The amount of savings that we have in the account is based on the amount of money we actually spent in the prior year. So if we spent $400 million, not what we budgeted, but if we spent $400 million, we need to make sure that our savings account, our budgeting process, has at least $40 million in the bonds. And whatever that, the other 2% is $8 million in the emergency fund. So that's that, and if we perform better than that, above that 10% and that 2%, we have something called this unrestricted fund balance. And unrestricted means that we could use it for anything. The restricted is the 10 and the 2, and then the 2% is the emergency piece, what basically we can get into if we have a windstorm or totally unexpected thing. So literally that's how the fund balance calculation is done. It takes into account supplementals that we do, revenues that we have, settlements that we take care of, and the recovery of any of those settlements in the prior year. In a nutshell, that's how the fund balance calculation is done. And so, again, it's primarily to make sure that we have enough reserves, and it's about our previous year expenditures.
So if I may follow up.
Yes.
So the 40 million and the 8 million, the 10 and the 2, so where does that come from? That comes out of operational monies or tax revenues, leftover capital?
Right. It's basically, we over time, we have built those reserves, and they could come from capital, they could come from revenue, they could come from property taxes to build that reserve. Yep. And when that reserve goes down, the way the tax cap is created, it allows you to, in the event of if you have a huge settlement, if you had a $50 million settlement, that would be terrible. But if you did, the tax cap requires and allows us to tax to recover that $50 million, and we shore to take that back up. That's why when we do that, they're only one-time things. They're just for one-time recovery. So if our settlements are $5 million, we tax to recover $5 million. If our settlements are $200,000, we adjust the tax cap for $200,000 to make sure that we reserve that. We don't tax to create unrestricted fund balance. We only tax to maintain that 10 and that 2. Anything above that, we create by savings or additional revenues.
Okay. And just one quick follow-up, because one question that always comes up when it comes to bonds and capital is if money, doesn't get spent in the entire amount for a project,
Right.
I understand it can be used for the next project on the priority list, which may not have been listed on the bond. But it also sounds like some of that money could make its way into our savings.
No, I don't
No,
think
it
the
could not.
capital
Okay.
cannot go to savings.
So that is separate.
That is totally separate.
Okay.
The other thing is that if we have a list of projects and then we do them all and we want to do the next one, the way the bond language is written, we do that in roads and parks, but we do not do that in the fire department. If we say we're going to do these fire engines, we don't go out and buy jet boats. We buy fire engines.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. France. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. As often happens, I thought Mr. Constant's idea was kind of brilliant. That was to bond for some services like homes. Did I got that right? And the genius of that is for the people that call us who want us to do something about homeless, we can say, fine, you should be out supporting this bond issue. And the genius for the administration is voter-approved bonds are outside of the cap, and so on. And for us, it is we can pass the buck and say, don't blame me, you should have voted for this or that. But give us a little guidelines here on what is legitimate for us to bond, particularly things that seem like they're operating.
In a nutshell, it has to result in an asset. A capital asset. It can't result in a program. It has to be something that someone can take away if you don't pay your bonds.
Yeah, it has to be something you can pick up.
That's right. So that's the simplest way to put it.
Good luck with that.
No,
Mr.
here's the thing,
Constant.
though.
It could be a
I just
facility.
don't know. We're under different rules from the state then, because I would like a legal analysis a financial legal analysis on that question, because at the state level, through the capital budget, we in fact did.
But it wasn't a
generate-
bond.
It was a state grant.
Right.
It was a grant.
It was a grant through the capital budget.
And I might just add, on a state level, there's huge undercover manipulations that go on in shifting stuff.
No.
From capital to operating,
Not
and
the
from
state.
last year's to this, and the budget revisions. And I keep telling people I'm not stupid, but I'm slow. And it is, what's a shell game? Magnificently done. Sorry.
Mr. Rivera.
So if we don't want to play shell games, which I suggest we don't, then one easy way we can, well, easy, quote unquote, way that we can go to get operating funds specifically targeted for homelessness is something like an alcohol tax, which I know my colleague, Mr. Trainee, has brought up many times.
Don't worry, we're working on it.
Good stuff. All right. Any other closing comments? No? Okay. We're going to close this. It's a work session, Mr. Haberman, not a committee.
All public meetings are reasonable.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Haberman.
My name is Eugene Claude Haberman, representing myself, follow public trust is an appropriate decision made by the governing body of my elected public interest, and is a matter to the ballot. Two of the most important decisions we have to make as a governing body is one, certification, and the second is approving the budget. Note here, as far as the budget, the lack of transparency, what I mean by that is you have to come to this meeting to get a copy of it, no agenda. Your committee meetings and use this agenda, you don't see when you go on the website where the committee notices. You can put a little click in there and put this document here, or the document that we had with the utilities. Those kind of things and agendas could be easily put there, but over the years you don't do that. And where's the connection? Also, about 4 or 5 minutes before the start of the meeting, the clerk comes and puts the papers here, really close. The last, just 4 minutes before the start, where's the chance of even the public or you even seeing this thing in the paper? So, and then the last thing to say is this. You were scheduling meetings for hearings. I see a crossover. Municipal utility thing is having a hearing. Their hearing is November 7th. You're also dealing with your second public hearing on the budget on November 2nd. So you basically got 2 major items on your budget. And to remind you this is that, with all due respect, these items do draw interest from the public. And I also am concerned to let you know, approximately 41 people spoke at the last meeting. I think it was 41st. I did the last assembly meeting. People were waiting in line to speak. People were with canes waiting to speak. With all due respect, you should be having a sign-up sheet for all these items. The Borough Assembly out there does that on all the items. There's a table, there's a staff person in the back, and your sign-up sheet. No need to say how do you spell your name, whatever. They sign it, and then staff comes up and brings in. And when you have 3 people, the next 3 people, you simply announce the next 3 people on the line are these 3 people, and then they're up there waiting to be able to speak. And would move faster and not in this scenario. I see that happening out there, and what that would mean is clerk staff being in the back, tables, all this, and constantly moving the next item, and that kind of thing. And it would be much better, and not the line of people I see, and people of age that should be standing for 40, 50 minutes of time with large packs and being respectful. They need to change that scenario and be respectful, and move faster too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman. Has this been provided to the public, or could it be posted on the website?
It definitely will be posted on the website. We'll
Great.
make sure the clerk has a copy. I know Ms. Wadowski's not here, so we want to make sure she has a copy. We'll provide it, absolutely. I'm going to send it to the Budget Advisory Commission. And until the administration is prepared to share it with you, we don't share it with anyone else until you see it. And then you get the first view, and then we share it with others.
Great. Thank you. This work session is closed.